Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast is about the journey to a more sustainable future in order for us to be able to do our bit to achieve net zero. I'll be discussing a variety of topics with experts in their field in order to educate and increase our knowledge of clean energy, electric vehicles and the electric vehicle infrastructure. So whether you're an individual wanting to make a difference at home, a small business or a corporate, this podcast is just for you. Today on the podcast, I have got Wouter Thijssen from Kenza Utilities. Wouter, thank you very much for joining me.
Hi Liz, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So you were introduced to me through a mutual acquaintance, as in Graham Cooper, and he spoke so highly of you. So there was no reason why I didn't want to just get you on straight away. So yeah, thank you very much for this.
Of course, happy to be here.
So you worked at National Grid for a few years, didn't you, before moving on to Kensa? Just tell me a little bit about your background, if you will.
Yeah, of course. So come from an engineering background, and that's where that's what led me to National Grid. And while there, my real driver was how do we address climate change at the biggest scale. And that led me into the strategy side of things, really being able to try and steer the ship of National Grid, if you will. Spent a bit of time working on heat decarbonisation, renewables in both especially the US part of the business, covering lots of different aspects, and was led to Kenza largely because I really wanted to tackle what I saw as the biggest sort of climate challenge still really to address, which is heating, and came on to Kenza's concept, which blew me away, and was fortunate enough to join them.
And actually, just looking at the Kenza website, and I've seen Kenza around because I've been kind of around engineering and manufacturing on and off for years and years, but just looking at your website while I was doing a bit of research, I was absolutely gobsmacked. So I want to try and introduce some of that into what we're talking about today. Can you give a little bit of background to what Kenza does and Kenza Utilities? You've got kind of, this is for those who are not involved in kind of the heat pump or heat decarbonisation, they might actually not know very much about. So can you just give us a little bit of a heads up on it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. So Kenza is a manufacturer, installer, and utility provider in the ground source heat pump space. There's three parts to the business: Kenza heat pumps, Kenza Contracting, and Kenza Utilities, the latter of which I head up. So heat pumps manufactures about 45% of the UK's ground source heat pumps down in a factory in Cornwall. And it's by far the largest UK manufacturer as well, which is great. The contracting part of the business was really set up with the idea that it's much easier to sell sort of 100 heat pumps to one sort of party than to sell 100 heat pumps to 100 parties, largely for the new build and social housing sectors. So with fuel poverty being a huge problem, heat pumps with a really low running costs, that's a great sort of application for the social housing sector. And Kenza Contracting comes in there and will design and end-to-end manage the installation of both the ground array, so the network that feeds the ground source heat pumps, which you can come on to in just a sec, and then the actual heat pumps themselves. So largely working with the new build, social housing and non-domestic sectors today. And then utilities, lastly. So that's the part that I head up, and it's really come from addressing the really big challenges to ground source heat pump adoption. So I think most people in sort of the heat pump space will know that there's lots of benefits to ground source heat pumps. Just to list a couple of them, they're cheaper to run because they get their source energy from deep underground and stored solar energy, which means they're generally cheaper to run. They're quieter. They don't have a sort of a fan that's whirring, which can cause disturbance. They're lower maintenance and longer life because they're sat inside, away from the elements. You don't have the visual impact, and you can get cooling with them as well because you've got a network at roughly 10 degrees that you can use in the summer for cooling. So most people are sort of somewhat familiar that ground source is, is the better technology, but it's more expensive and more disruptive because as opposed to a box that you place outside that just takes the air in, creates heat from it, and warms your house with it, you're talking about pipes that are going up to 300 meters deep.
Is that how
to
deep they have
take
to
that
go?
energy. They can do it. Depends on the heat load of the property, but yeah, we've drilled up to 300 meters before. Sometimes you go to 100 or less. Sometimes it's 300.
Wow.
It varies.
Oh,
But the UK's got some terrific drillers and real rich history with geology. That means there's a lot of expertise here that the UK has to lean on.
yeah.
Again, homegrown sort of industry in that sense. And effectively, yeah, So the challenges are that cost and disruption from all of that stuff that's outside the house. And we've gone, well, with your boiler today, you've got a white box in your house, but you don't own the gas pipes in your garden, right? There's a utility, Cadent Gas or whoever, that owns those pipes, and you, through your bill, are paying a standing charge to access that network. We effectively go and replicate that. So we'll fund, own, maintain all of those sort of boreholes that are outside your house, generally in the street or the pavement. And you just get a white box, plug it in, pay your electricity bill to run your heat pump, just like you pay your gas bill to run your gas boiler today. And you'll pay a standing charge to the utility network to feed your heat pump. And effectively now you've taken those two barriers of upfront cost and disruption and just removed them because there's now a utility that's doing that for you. So it's a simple sort of business model thing, but we think that can transition this from being sort of a technology that's really well suited to the new build social housing, non-domestic and sort of individual house space to millions and millions of households across the UK.
My God, that's just, yeah, it is totally mind blowing. Do you want to just talk a little bit about Stithians, about your Heat the Streets
Oh, certainly.
project? Because that's
Yes.
really interesting. We were talking beforehand, weren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this utility concept that I was sort of talking about, where there's a utility putting the network in the road, and that you get a white box, plug into this network when you're ready, meaning that you've got the biggest barriers to ground source heat pumps removed. We've gone and demonstrated that in Stithians. So as opposed to talking about it, we've gone and done it. And there's particularly in the sort of parish of Stithians in Cornwall, we have taken sort of parts of the village and put effectively in one part that's sort of a ring road, put the network all in that whole ring road, and people again get their heat pump and plug it in. We've not put heat pumps into every single property there. But when people are ready, say when their oil boiler fails, or some people have just filled their oil tank from the winter, or have other forms of heating and they're not quite ready to switch, whenever they're ready, they then just get this box, which is roughly the size of generally anywhere between a microwave and a dishwasher, so quite a small thing, not too dissimilar to your boiler. Plug into the network that's there, and they've got the greenest, cheapest, cleanest form of heat. So that's what we've done there in Stithians, and it's with support from the European Regional Development Fund. We've actually just last week connected the world's first heat pump into a in-road utility network for ground source, and it was a fantastic story of the resident there who's been struggling with their oil heating, and they were ecstatic about it. It was actually really nice to see just how much of an impact it had on people's lives, and yeah, we hope to bring that to the masses.
So you're talking about people who are getting they're currently got oil tanks for their heating, and I've got a friend who's got exactly that. She's kind of out in the sticks, kind of up in Bedfordshire, and kind of again, actually no, Buckinghamshire. Get it right, Liz. So would that how? I suppose my thinking is why are they having to use oil tanks rather than, why wouldn't they have actually had gas pumped in originally, and actually can you do that? Can you take it to a place where it hasn't already got the network in there, hasn't got the infrastructure in there?
For sure. So Stithians was an off gas sort of village
Oh, the whole
prior
village
to this.
was.
The whole village was, so they were all on oil or storage
Yeah.
heating. So whilst we've demonstrated it here, because oil is even more carbon emitting than gas, we
Yeah.
wanted to tackle that first.
Yes.
It's also very close to our factory, so it's great for all the R&D we're doing to be close to the site and to have a real relationship with the people there. But we see this as a blueprint for not just for rural communities, but especially for terraced streets and for flats. So if you think about sort of, UK heat decarbonisation, there's roughly 28 million homes that we need to decarbonise. We've got 27 years. So that's more than 1 million a year, which is 20,000 a week.
Oh.
Right now, where the UK heat pump market is doing roughly 40 to 50,000 a year. So in what we need to do what we're doing now in a year, we need to start doing every 2 to 3 weeks to get to net zero. So it's a massive ramp up. So you need a scale based solution. So we kind of go, okay, there's no silver bullet. What we're doing here with our form of utility based ground source heat pumps, which we call networked heat pumps. That's not the silver bullet. There's a range, and there isn't in the energy transition any silver bullets, just like with transport or with electricity. So you start with the dense city centres, so middle of London, middle of Birmingham, middle of Manchester, Bristol, etc. You go, well, there's so much heat density there. Traditional district heating, so the sort of the types that E.ON and Vattenfall, etc., will deploy. That's probably the superior solution there. You then move all the way out to sort of semi-detached and detached houses, where you've got the space. You probably want an individual sort of air source or ground source heat pump for that. But we've just skipped from centre of London to sort of spaced out houses that you might have more in the countryside. What we're missing is terrace streets, terrace housing, and flats. And those are, not quite dense enough for district heating, but probably a little too dense to have, your individual air source or ground source heat pump in a lot of cases. So that there is where we go, well, if they can't have district heating and they can't have individual heat pumps, what's the solution they can get? How can they decarbonize heat? We're talking here about 8 million terrace streets and sort of 5-6 million flats. That's half the housing stock. We go, well, what they have today is the gas network. So they've got infrastructure in the street, a white box in their house that plugs into that infrastructure. With the solution that we've shown in Stithians, we can just replicate that to sink the boreholes in the roads, in the public roads, link them together, and then whenever people are ready, you get your white box, whether it's from Kenza or from NIBI or whoever else. You plug it into that network, and you've got a decarbonized solution for you. So whilst we've demonstrated it in the rural space, we really think the semi-dense terrace streets and flats, this is sort of the perfect solution for that.
And you were saying kind of the size of our house before, weren't you? Kind of, we'd probably need something that was a little bit bigger, but it's still, we're not talking about an outdoor pump, are we? We're talking about an indoor pump.
Exactly, and it's sort of for a slightly larger house, you'd probably have something that's more like a dishwasher-sized unit that could sit in an airing cupboard, or in the kitchen or wherever you have the space. It's generally better to keep them inside, away from the elements. They'll last longer, less maintenance. But yeah, we have put it in outside enclosures where that's not possible. It's a common thing that gets said is, there's not enough space for heat pumps inside houses. Well, you can look for it outside if need be. We've not really found any houses where heat pumps aren't suitable, which runs counter to some of the claims that get talked about, particularly in the hydrogen space.
I was going to say, because like I say, I said to you before, didn't I? The person that we were talking to about a heat pump was specifically not talking about anything to do with indoors. We were talking about an outdoor heat pump, and that's where we fell into kind of like this issue with the kind of the width down the side of our house, which wasn't kind of wide enough and able to get enough air coming through it. So that kind of
Yeah.
put a little bit of the mockers on us. Do you know what I mean? Trying to go that way.
Yeah, I mean there's probably some planning reform needed. I think there's, you know, certainly a role for air source heat pumps in sort of more dense areas, and you know, air source heat pumps need to get quieter to limit the noise impacts. But yeah, that is a common problem, just not having the space or wanting to have a box in your garden whilst you know, in the back garden where you'll be either sleeping above with your window open or sat outside in the summer. So yeah, we think there's probably more reform needed. We don't think we're not purist about ground source. We think you need many millions more air source heat pumps. You need many more millions ground source heat pumps. But yeah.
So if there's a couple of questions. So one of them is the whole reason for them, and I know you explained it to me, but it'd be good to kind of go over this as well. The whole reason or the way that you run an air source heat pump is very different, isn't it, to kind of like the way that you run your boiler, in the fact that you have to run an air source heat pump constantly.
Yeah, more constantly, and a ground source heat pump for that matter too. I think, I mean, the general aspect is that boilers are massively oversized. Say a house that needs 5-6 kilowatts of heat might have a 25-30 kilowatt powered boiler. So they're massively oversized, and really, when you're running your boiler for, you know, 15 minutes and then it's off, and then you leave it for a few hours and you turn it on again, it's like kind of like driving on the motorway at 200 miles an hour and then at 10 miles an hour, then 200 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour. With a heat pump, you're just going the whole way at a much more efficient, say 60, 70 miles an hour. You'll get to the same place at the same time, i.e. your home will be warm, but you'll do that in a much more efficient way. And generally heat pumps like to operate at a lower flow temperature, so 35, 45 degrees, as opposed to, you know, the much higher temperatures that boilers are typically set to. Even if you have a boiler, you want to be running it at a lower flow temperature because you'll save money on your bills.
Yeah.
But heat pumps generally, you'll get a much higher coefficient of performance by running it at a lower flow temperature. So yeah, your heat pumps, you do want a bit more of an efficient, constant stream of heat, as opposed to sort of the on-off that we're used to with boilers. It's a little bit of a behavior change aspect that's needed with consumers. One of the most common technical calls we do get is people will touch their radiator and not immediately go ow, i.e. It's at 45 or 50 degrees. And they'll go, my heat pump's not working, my hand's not burning. And that's a common call we get, and we, you know, 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10 really, the heat pump's working fine, but people are just not used to the difference of experience. So and the government's been doing a good campaign on about reducing flow temperature. So that's one of the behavioral aspects that's different, but it's the way we frame it is, look, what you're used to is a bit more of a wasteful way of doing things. This is a better, more efficient way. So as not to frame it as, look, you're taking a step back in your heating quality, you're actually doing things more efficiently and better.
So having that lower flow temperature, does that have an overall effect on the temperature in the house? Say, for example, you know, kind of before Christmas, we had that period of like -6. So would it actually affect the heat of the house at all? Because it's kind of, you know, it's running at a cool. If it's not heating the radiators, it's going to be more efficient, but it's on. Would that mean the radiators would be on all the time, but they'd be on a kind of a lower, they'd be on lower, so the house would stay at a constant heat? Is that what it'd be?
Pretty much, yeah. You're getting the same units of heat into the house, just at a lower temperature, a lower delta T. So yeah, it's but you know how some of the biggest heat pump deployments in Europe are in countries like Sweden, Norway, Finland, where it gets much colder than here, and you know, homes there granted are more efficient, so will suffer less heat leakage out of it. but they work just fine there. I think it's a commonly cited myth that heat pumps don't work when it's cold, or that heat pumps don't work in all houses. We're yet to find a house that doesn't work for a heat pump.
But then, like you just said, the word myth, that's what people listen to. It's like, there's a lot of negativity about kind of decarbonisation in general, isn't there? Because of the fact that we're going to be forced, or we are being forced to change the way that we're actually doing stuff, and people don't like change, do they? So
yeah, there's granted a lot of fear about change, and there's lots of negative headlines about how that change will be a worse form of heat. I think actually this is a change for the better. It's more efficient, better for the planet. With our sort of form, you get cooling with your heat source as well, so it's an upgrade there. It's generally viewed as a more comfortable form of heat to have heat trickling into your house constantly, as opposed to ramping on, ramping off. So actually for people, it's the outcome is a better form of heat. Plus the fact that you're not going to have a toxic explosive fuel in your house. I mean, if we were to be on heat pumps now, right, and people would be talking about bringing gas in, you'd be like, you're crazy. We're not going to go from what we have to an explosive fuel. But that's just what we're used to, and that's what's normal. So you're actually getting a much safer, cheaper to run kind of fuel in your property, which makes total sense.
And we were talking as well, weren't we, before we started recording about radiators, when we're kind of and sort of like how you deal with you get your new heat pump, but then you maybe have to have a look at the radiators. That if you just explain, because I can't explain it the way you said it.
Yeah, I mean, there's instances where a radiator or two might need to be replaced. There's plenty of instances we go into a property and they do not need to be replaced. It's generally because that you're going to operate at a lower flow temperature. You want a larger surface area to get the heat into the room. Where we do have to upgrade it, that's generally, we're not talking about a radiator that's, this big and then we're doubling the size of it. It's generally 20% thicker than what it was before. So it's really hardly noticeable at all. The change. So it's often talked about as like, oh, we're going to have to rip out all your radiators, all your pipe work. You're going to be out of your house for weeks. In all of these cases, we do this in situ with people remaining in the dwellings. And yeah, the outcome is you hardly see the difference in your radiator quite often. So it's again one of these, particularly where there's competing interests for whether heat pumps are adopted or not. That's often thrown as effectively a myth in how disruptive and how impactful that will be. So yeah.
Okay. And you were talking about the fact that you can use heat, the number of countries like you said, Norway, Sweden, Finland, that are obviously kind of more efficient housing. Do we need to kind of up the amount of insulation that you have in a house in order to kind of to manage that and make sure you don't get the heat loss? Because the thing that we notice in our house specifically is in the winter, we just seem to kind of eke, it just disappears in certain parts of the house. Some parts are okay. Yeah. And of course it's my son's room, which is fine. It's always nice and warm in there. But in our bedroom, I'm like, I'm freezing. It's kind of, so is it really imperative for you to actually look at that level of upping your level of insulation then?
For sure. I mean, there's mass sort of insulation required in sort of the UK housing stock. Basic things like cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, air tightness, things like that just will pay off within a year or two. I think the purist view that sometimes gets espoused is we need every home in the UK to be external wall insulation, floor insulation, almost to a passive house standard. That we probably take a slightly different view on, which sort of that's sort of the fabric first view. You address the fabric and then you think about the heating source. Where we probably land is, well, what do we want to do? We want to decarbonize, so lower carbon at the lowest cost, so people save the biggest amount on their bills. Yes. With external wall insulation, sometimes there'll be instances where it makes total sense. There's other instances where you're paying 20k or so for a 20% reduction in heat demand, therefore 20% reduction in carbon and in bills. Whereas a heat pump, you put it in, you're seeing an 80% reduction in carbon, and you'll start to see a bill saving as well. So in some senses, we think, yes, insulation is needed, but to a degree that's sensible, not going all in on every single form of insulation you can do to make everything a passive house and then think about the heating. There's probably better bang for your buck and carbon emission in a little bit of insulation where it's needed, and then your heat pump, whether it's air source or ground source, in both cases. And if you stay on gas, those are also sensible insulation measures to do anyway. So there's no regrets, but then we think we probably disagree slightly with the fabric first view, and you want to start bringing in heating a little bit earlier on.
Yeah, because it's great, like you're saying about, you were talking about terrace houses earlier on, weren't you? You know, with it, I don't know what the kind of housing situation now is out in Sweden and Finland and places like that, but you know, there's so many terraces, you can't control the age of some of the houses is quite old, isn't it? So it's not always that easy to kind of address the fabric of the house, especially if you're attached to another 5 or 6, you know, kind of along that terrace, is it really? So I understand.
Absolutely.
Can do what you can internally, but you know, if you can't manage everything, can you?
Exactly. Yeah. So you need a combination.
Yeah. So do you know what you brought me to? You were talking about costs as well, and I was just thinking about so what would obviously there's a massive cost comparison when you're talking about decarbonisation, compare, you know, air source, ground source versus gas. But is this something that is affordable for everybody at the moment? Or, you know, I know what you're talking about with regards to Stithians and kind of the network there, but say for somebody like myself, you know, we need to kind of, how do you go about getting the heat point pump sorted through yourselves? I mean, obviously you've got I'm assuming you've got a network of you've got your contracts organisation, and haven't you? But how does somebody like me go and find a heat pump, a Kensa heat pump that is suitable for our house?
Got it. So I guess a couple of things to unpick there. I guess the first is just the general UK view on heating. Heat pumps particularly, is the UK. I mean, it's not a great stat to have, but they're sort of near the bottom of the league table in Europe in heat pump adoption at the moment. You know, saying that sort of 50,000 heat pumps a year. I mean, we're talking about 600,000 by 2028 as a target. Yeah. Tough target. It's a 15x growth in what we've got today, which is huge. France is getting close to that this year. God. So there's lots of reasons for why, different contexts, things like that. But the main thing is that right now when you are to get a heat pump, you will switch from paying your gas bill to an electricity bill. Electricity currently costs about 3.4 times more than gas per unit, which means that you get a ground source heat pump of a COP of 4 or more, you will be seeing a bill saving. If your air source heat pump's correctly installed, you should also see a sort of a smaller bill saving, but probably still a bill saving as well. Whereas in sort of, for example, my home country, the Netherlands, or Italy, Sweden, places like that ratio is between 1.5 and 2. So you go and get yourself a heat pump and switch off gas, you're saving hundreds and hundreds of pounds, if not even close to 1,000. And in those countries, it's really hard to get a heat pump now because they are flying off the shelves and they're constrained by other things like supply or installer capacity. In the UK, we do need to grow the installer capacity, but the bigger thing holding it back is the fact that there's a bunch of levies and taxes on electricity. 12% of the electric bill is levies, where only 3% of the gas bill is that. We need to shift these sort of taxes on that to probably the dirtier fuel or onto general taxation or other means, and bring that spark gap, to call that ratio of electricity to gas, down, and that will mean that you're going to be saving hundreds and hundreds of pounds to get onto your heat pump, and that will make it a much more economic sort of proposition. It's sort of a, and then I think particularly for our utility scale solution, we think you probably need to look at what's called heat zoning. So right now the UK government is putting through legislation for heat network zoning, which is effectively where you divide, where local authorities are receiving powers to designate certain zones as that's right for a heat network, typically centre of Bristol, centre of London, those kind of places. We think you probably want to do that for the entire local authority, not just that's a heat network, that's something else, but that's a heat network, that's better for air source heat pumps, that's better for networked heat pumps, this sort of utility scale solution that we're talking about. And that then means that there's a street that's been designated as the zone for networked heat pumps. That then gives us confidence to come and put the network in, so that whenever those people's boilers break or they move house or they're just ready to transition, they get a heat pump, whether it's from Kensa or from any other ground source manufacturer, plug it in. And that's how we think you decarbonize the country at scale and do that, in a sort of phased manner. We think, like I said, 20,000 heat pumps a week. We need to do that in a street by street manner, and that's how we would roll out this sort of network. We think that will be subsidy free, competitive with gas by 2028. So there's some things that need to happen, such as electricity levies shifting onto other places where it's the gas bill or somewhere else, and probably zoning introduced, and probably certainty that we do have a long stop date, just like EVs have that date for when you can't get a new petrol or diesel car. We need that same thing for heating as well, for boilers. Start to do some of those things, and by 2028 we're confident we can do this subsidy free for streets at a time. Right now it's we're doing this with some grant support, so in places like Stithians, and we're rolling it out in sectors where it's commercial, particularly new build, because new build from 2025 cannot put fossil fuel, 2024 in Scotland, fossil fuel heating systems in. So there, again, it's either an air source or a ground source heat pump. And if we fund the infrastructure, the cheapest thing for a new builder is a ground source heat pump, which is again counterintuitive to what the normal narrative is. So that's sectors where it works today, and also the social housing and non-domestic sectors. But this sort of mass private rollout, as in copy paste what we did in Stithians to terrace streets and flats, that's still a couple of years away from being sort of subsidy free compared to gas, largely because of a few policy tweaks that we think are needed, in tandem with us as industry bringing the costs down with some of the innovations we're doing to higher COP heat pumps, lower cost manufacturing, all that kind of stuff. So we really think a couple of tweaks, some cost declines in industry, and this is, gonna be flying street by street from 2028.
Oh, that'd be brilliant. So are you selling direct into the local? You're wanting to go get into the local authorities. So is there a way for, like I say, for somebody like myself to come to Kensa to get a heat, an air source heat pump that would work, that's not networked currently?
Yeah, so Kensa only supplies ground source, but you through your installer plumber go for an air source, or with ground source, yes. I mean, Kensa, we're still doing sort of individual house, and that's been very much the bread and butter of the business. Whilst we're seeing huge growth rates at the moment, the company's been around since sort of the late 90s, and the bread and butter has really been individual houses that we come and design, put the infrastructure in the garden, and fit a heat pump in. So that's also very much our bread and butter, and that will continue to be really important, and it is today. But where we sort of really see a huge takeoff in growth is that mass retrofit that the UK needs to achieve its net zero target. You don't get to net zero without decarbonising heating, and you need scale street by street solutions to do so.
Yeah, when do you see, right? Okay, so I know you just kind of said it, but how many years? what is the idea? We know what we've got. We've got a hard stop, haven't we? We know when we've got this hard stop. But what timescale do you see this? What would your ideal solution be for this? If the government did this, and this, and we could kind of start rolling it out by X. What are your thoughts on timescales?
So I think that 2028 is probably a realistic timeline for that. We'd love to start sooner, I think, but there's effectively, three sort of key asks from government: shift levies from electricity to other forms, introduce heat zoning, and introduce a sort of a fixed sort of deadline for when new gas boilers cannot be installed anymore. Combination of those three things, plus us, seeing through some of our R&D projects. 2028, we start to see streets going one at a time, kind of like how in the 60s. So Burton upon Trent was the first town in the UK to go from Towns gas to what's called high-speed gas or natural gas at the time, and that was then rolled out region by region. Right. We see Stithians as the first sort of demonstrator, just like Burton upon Trent. Yeah. But then from 2028, we really start going area by area to decarbonize it. So that's sort of where we see this. We think there's others in the heat pump space doing a great job, like Octopus, for example, targeting some of the lower hanging fruit for houses with air source heat pumps. There's there's a need for many more heat pumps across the spectrum. There's great things being done across the industry. Not just Octopus, but also many other very, very competent installers that are doing high quality installs and improving the reputation of heat pumps across. And people like Nathan Gambling are doing a great job of bringing that sort of need for quality to the market. So lots of things happening, but we think 2028 onwards is when we think particularly our street by street networked heat pump solution, like in Stithians, goes to the masses.
Sounds good. What site? So how many people? And we talked about this. So I went to Stithians when, oh my God, I must have been about 10 or 11 on a family holiday. So I've actually stayed in Stithians, which is kind of slightly weird. But I don't know how many people actually live in Stithians, because it's not a massive village, is it, or town?
No, it's a few hundred.
Yeah.
Have to check the exact number, but yeah, it's. But we see it as it's been fantastic working with the residents there. They've been very supportive of we're learning by doing, and they've been very understanding and supportive, and we hope to do them proud in showing that what we've learned there goes and helps millions of homes get lower bills and lower carbon emissions in the years to come.
It's a brilliant pilot. Actually, to like you say, learn by doing. That's the biggest thing that you need to do, and I wish you the best of luck, because it just seems they're kind of the most sensible route to do, to choose, in my mind. We've already got networks out there that are doing the similar thing, but just with a different fuel. With fossil fuel, just like you say, replicate the way that it's done. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's transitions are tricky and scary. The more we can do to say, look, what you're familiar with gas in terms of as a network that somebody else looks after, you've got a white box that generates heat. The better helps with the familiarity. There's that difference in actually it's more efficient, and it's 4 to 5 times more efficient than your boiler, and it doesn't need to ramp up, ramp down. You'll keep your home a nice steady temperature without sort of the dips that you're used to. So familiarity is certainly important for people to help through the transition.
So 2028, let's see it happen. So just to finish off with then, what contact details can you give people? So if you've got a variety of people who are interested in actually having a look, because your website is fabulous. I was kind of, my eyes nearly popped out of my head when I was looking at it, thinking, wow, this is really good. So do you want to give your contact detail, your website address?
Yeah, sure. So It's kensautilities.com. And to contact, I mean, free to add me on LinkedIn. I'm sure we can include it in the show
Will
notes.
do.
Or info@kensautilities.com if you want to reach us that way. Love to talk about how we can any questions people have or thoughts, ideas. We're building a business model here that we think will decarbonize millions of homes. So keen to hear other people's ideas and thoughts.
And you're also, so I'm just peeking at the bottom of your website where it says, so you're on Twitter as well. Is that Kenza Utilities?
I believe so, yes. Twitter and LinkedIn, we're active there.
And it even looks like you have, and I've
there.
not checked this one out, it even looks like, yes, you've got a YouTube channel as well, which is Kenza Heat Pumps. They've got the one that's on here anyway. So yes.
There's lots of great explainers there about how heat pumps work, how everything works. It's sort of like the perfect intro to the technology there. It's we've got one of our co-founders who's just phenomenal. Put a camera in front of him, talk for 10 minutes, and he can explain everything in like you wish a teacher would. So yeah.
And that's what we need, isn't it? We need people to be able to actually explain, like you have been doing, at the right level to help people to understand. And it just and people might not like the word education, but it is about educating us and actually changing our behaviour. So yeah. But listen, thank you ever so much. It's been amazing talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to this happening. So when I see the Kenza Utilities van in Reading, where I live, I'll be adamant. I'll be over the moon and excited. So thank you ever so much for your time, Wouter. I really appreciate it.
Terrific. Thank you for having me. It's been great to be here, Liz.
Thank you. And listen, and to everybody else, thank you for listening and watching, and I shall see you all next time. Bye-bye then. Bye. You've been watching Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell icon, and you'll receive all of our weekly videos. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye.